The free units that come out with collabs in War of the Visions are often quite good. Now, they're not all good, but again, you know, they're free units. So let's figure out whether or not Edward is one of these good free units, or maybe he's one of the bad ones. All right, so we are going to change the way I do things once again. And at this moment, I'd like to reveal to you my brand new scouting cards for Edward Elric. So these are cards that I made to summarize a lot of the information about units, and you can see what they do have and what they don't have in a fairly clear manner. So we'll go through each of his scouting cards and we'll make some determinations about him. Now, this is just a checklist, right? There's going to be some differences of opinion on whether things should be checked or not. There's going to be times where it doesn't tell the whole story. Like, for example, if I say that he has courage removal, but it's on a sub kit that you may or may not use, that's something that we can talk about in the video. But if you just want to know what he has access to, then these cards are going to be a really good summary for you. So let's start by talking about his durability options here. So we have Innate Spirit that can also be buffed through the Spellblade subjob, and also again his magic resist. As part of that, we also have the 70% magic reduction barrier. So if you're in a meta where you're coming up against magic units that don't have barrier breaks, and maybe it's a mixed team, then Edward can very reliably set up to take attacks from those types of units. But he's also going to have access to things to deal with some physical attacks, including Protect, but also very high slash and pierce resistances. Now, those resistances are particularly relevant currently because there's a lot of slashers. We've got our dark slashers, we have our fire slashers, but we also have pierce units in both elements. And in fire in particular, you have Sorrow, who uses a pierce subjob and uses it to great effect. So Edward will be able to take on those types of units, even though he doesn't have that innate defense. He does have the Protect though, and while we see these people with these, you know, these strike units that are having these really high slash resistance values, maybe we're gonna see, you know, some Sephiroths switch to Pugilist subjob. I know people are already using it to be able to get around that high slash resistance. Well, for Edward, that means that all of a sudden his Protect can't be dispelled by the Protect Dispel on Sephiroth's subjob on the Soldier subjob, and that kind of adds an extra layer of survivability that you mix in with the fact that he's using AoE resistance, because you should probably have Alphonse that's taking the single target attacks, and you know, Edward's going to be hopefully just taking those AoE attacks as a DPS and not a bruiser. All right, the next scouting report we're going to look at is utility. So let's bring that card up now and we'll switch over to our footage, and we can see here that we have a lot of different utility for Edward. We have a barrier break, which is actually an AoE barrier break, so there's bonus points for that. The fact that you can take out everybody's barriers at once, it's quite a big AoE as well, is really effective. We also have a 100% hit that has a select 2 choice. So this is excellent for going after multiple evade units with a strong single target attack. And the only downside to it is that it only has the 3 uses. Luckily, Edward can also be built for some pretty high accuracy if you want to, more on that in a little bit. He also gets a dispel on everything. So he uses a TP buff, everything then becomes a dispel on hit. And this is also very effective, but because it's on hit and not tied to a skill, it could actually be dispelled itself. So just something to consider on that. But overall, that's going to be an incredibly effective tool. We also can talk about the courage removal. Like I said, it's on the subjob. So if you want to use Strider subjob, you get access to another damage type, but you also get access to that courage removal that is also a barrier break. So very, very strong. However, like I said, you might want that Spellblade sub to access those magic resistant qualities. And if you're not looking to counter magic in any way, shape, or form, then yeah, I think that courage removal will be pretty important in certain matchups. However, if you're going to run Perrine with Edward, then she'll carry the courage removal as well, and that's going to be on her main kit, so it won't be as big a deal to compensate for. Now we can talk again about the accuracy that you could build with Edward, but the big thing is he's kind of tied equipment-wise because you want to use his Pocketwatch, and his Pocketwatch does have a generous 24 accuracy version that's going to be decent. It's not going to be the highest accuracy you can build. If you're finding that you can't hit with him without the 100% hit attack, then you might want to actually put on a different accuracy item, and then you would lose the pocket watch, which would then affect his AP management, because right now he has an AP restore on his kit already. He has a AP consumption down from the pocket watch, so his AP management is actually pretty good. Really what we're looking at here is whether you want to build for full accuracy with something like an Alex ring, or perhaps what you're going to do is use that ability to not have to use bells, not have to use some sort of AP restore TMR to build an accuracy TMR, like a Yerma's TMR. And then that would give you access to have a high accuracy buff, but still use the pocket watch. And that would be specifically for when you're taking on fire evasion teams, specifically with Yuffie in them. Finally, we're going to talk about the damage that Edward is capable of doing, and it is a decent amount. So we'll pull up that scouting report now, and we'll take a look at what he has to offer. So Edward has a very high attack stat. He also has a strike imperil, but I want to mention that that's on a very low range, low potency attack. We're really just going to see that be used in PvE, but maybe in PvP if somebody has like really high strike resistance. So we're talking somebody like Esther, we're talking somebody like Engelbert that has a high strike resist that you'll actually need to break through for your team, then that's a circumstance where you might see this attack. But otherwise, he doesn't have to worry about a strike imperil because most units have low or weak strike resistance. He also has a 45% defense break, just 45 defense break on his limit burst. It should hit very hard. If that takes somebody into the negative, you're going to be doing major damage there. He also has good defense penetration. It can go up to 70% innate on the kit when you use the 100% hit attack. So it's really quite an important attack. The downside, of course, is that it has the 3 uses. So in guild battle, it's going to mean that he drops off a little bit. And then he has strike and pierce on the main job, but also he has slash on his sub jobs. Now you're not going to be using the Spellblade sub job for damage, but on the Strider sub job, you could totally use some slash attacks. He just won't use them that much aside from maybe the slow attack on the Strider that has the high range. But other than that, like, he's going to be using his strike attacks most of the time. We can also talk some cons for Edward. I think I mentioned that the pocket watch can be kind of a limiting piece of equipment. At the same time, it's just really good for him. So most of the time it's going to be fine. It's just something to keep in mind. His survivability is also very specific and meta dependent. It means that if you're coming up against any other strike teams, or maybe you're coming up against a lot of missile, there is a pretty easy way to get through to him. He doesn't have the courage re-raise. He doesn't have the self-heal. He doesn't have a lot of physical survivability aside from the resistances and the protect. So there are going to be certain units that take him out quite easily. But again, hopefully you're running him with the tank so that you can protect him. And then finally, the biggest thing is that 100% hit skill is so good. It's amazing. But it only has 3 uses. I think that is a huge demerit against him. But again, he's a free unit, so can we really be complaining about him that much? We can take a look at a comparison here where we have Edward, Alphonse, and Perrine, and obviously that's going to be a really high candidate for a team in itself. And we can see they all have really high slash and pierce resistance. And they all have pretty good accuracy, except for Alphonse, of course, pretty decent agility and some mobility that they can offer, depending if you want to augment that through their passives or not. So when we look at Edward, he can become very mobile and get some agility, but that might cost you resistances or the accuracy, depending on which one you actually want to cut there. When we look down at Perrine, she's kind of the similar circumstance where if you want to build her accuracy, you're going to have to lose her attack buff or her agility buff. You can't have all 3 of those. As a team altogether, Edward's going to be a really big damage dealer for you. He's going to provide the dispel for everybody else in this team, and he can do some barrier breaking for the team as well, whereas Perrine's going to bring just a lot of damage, courage removal, and then just constantly cycling with her high CT boosts. So this looks like a really solid team. There's an obvious team that they're trying to combat in any sort of fire team or also any sort of dark team. And what is also good about Perrine is that she brings healing power down to this team. So I think this is a really good starting team if you happen to have Perrine already. But Edward and Alphonse plus any strike unit is going to be a really fun team to run in the short term. Let's talk about the Alchemist Pocket Watch, because there's so many interesting versions of this. We have the shield version so that you can cover his lack of innate defense. You have the barrier version if you want to go extra spirit and really stock up against those magic attacks. But we also have the aim version to supplement his accuracy, and it gives 24 accuracy. So 24 accuracy is good. And this would actually be good for a lot of new players, but it doesn't have that accuracy passive, and that's where it kind of drops off. So then you have to be building that into your trust stones or whatever it is. So if you're finding that the 24 accuracy is not enough for your Edward, you will have to build something else. So when I look at this, I see two options. The shield is definitely a good one. I think aim could be safe to build as well. Best thing to do is build one of each. 3 pocket watches, one of each type, but more realistically, probably 2 pocket watches, a shield and an aim will do. Although I totally see when we have a magic meta that the barrier would be a really interesting pocket watch. He really, honestly, depending on the meta, could want all 3 of these pocket watches. So if you're not adverse to farming 3 whole MR items, you could do all 3, but if I had to pick, it would be shield first, aim second, and then barrier third. So why does Edward actually want this? Well, it's key to his AP management because he gets AP consumption down 15%. He also gets wind attack and reaction block rate, both of which are very strong for him. Very important things to have on a kit. The reaction block rate more specifically is just so important right now. He also gets 8% pierce and slash resistance, which is very good. And that's actually just good for new players in general. People will want to farm this as a new player to put on lots of their units. Alphonse can use this and his chalk case to just be super tanky against these damage types, and then you could just use a TMR weapon, a TMR armor, or TMR accessory, and that would be a really safe build for a new player to just build out a couple of good accessories for Alphonse and then just work on his own TMR armor. All of a sudden you've got a pretty good Alphonse build. We also have Edward's TMR to look at. It's a cloth armor. It has decent stats, even 2 agility on there, which is pretty interesting. The ability gives regen and 25% single target resistance, which is a very generous amount of single target resistance. 2 uses, which you love to see. It's a great effect. It gets weighed down a little bit because of the cloth designation, because people might want to use a different cloth armor on their units, but also because many tanks can't use this and you want to build single target resistance on your tanks. Even so, it's a very good piece of gear. It's a really solid gear for anyone that thinks they're going to take damage. A very good effect, and it's something that once my Edward's done slow building, I am for sure going to be testing this out and putting it on units to see if I like it enough to make it a thing. If you're wondering if you should transcend Edward, then yes, you should. It really helps with his survivability, but also gives him a little bit of a modifier update on his Job 25 skill, which will actually come into effect more often than you might think. So it's just a slam dunk to transcend him. You also might be wondering about his vision card. And again, that is a slam dunk. You should just pull for it. It's limited. It's not going to come back. And it's really good for him and Alphonse and any future units that fit those job types. So it's basically a no-brainer. If you have the Visior and if you're going to play with any of these units, it's just so much safer to pull for the vision card. So how good is Edward? He's pretty good. Strong firepower. He's lacking a bit of survivability against specific types of damage, but he's going to be very strong against very specific attack types, magic units that don't bring a barrier break, and basically what's a lot of what's in our meta right now. So Sephiroth is weak to strike, just saying, but watch out for his Shadow's Flare, as that is a non-type attack, and his strike attacks actually can do, you know, decent damage to Alphonse and to Edward as well. So, you know, new players, yes, build Edward, free unit. You save a lot of Visior, pull for his vision card, and I strongly recommend that you get Alphonse as well if you're a new player. Experienced players with wind or strike teams will also want Edward and probably Alphonse. He offers enough offensively and utility-wise to actually make up for some of the gaps in his vulnerability, in his survivability. So he is a good build, a safe build, and you don't have to spend the Visior to get him. So if you really want to be careful, just do what I'm doing. Slow build them. It will take a little bit longer. You can maybe, you know, go hard on the Chocobo expeditions with your tickets or whatever, but at the end of the day, you can get him there eventually. And if you want to strike a balance, maybe you just set a cap on how much Visior you're going to buy shards with, and then slow build them the rest of the way, or get them to 115 and then slow build them, whatever it is. You come up with a plan, and when you get them to Transcendence, you can always use those general mind spheres that you can convert to finish off his Transcendence. So no big deal if you want to accelerate at certain points of his development. Otherwise, that's going to be all from me. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the new style of video with these scouting cards. I enjoyed making them, and I know that they're probably not perfect. You can give me your feedback on on what you think could be changed about them, and I will or will not listen to you based on what you say. But that's kind of fair, because it's never going to be perfect. Whatever some person's perfect is going to be somebody else's flawed. So, you know, I'm just going to, you know, be chill about it. But I do appreciate constructive feedback, even if I can't say the word that well. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in a future video.